A year after the plane crash at the Kozhikode airport that killed 20 people and injured several others, the Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau, or the AAIB, has released a 257-page report that investigated that ill-fated flight that led to the loss of at least 20, including the two pilots who were killed. Let's go across to Vishnu Som, who has this report with him. Vishnu, what are the findings of this report and what was the probable cause of accident?
In two words, Sarah, pilot error. And this was something which was being discussed quite extensively, given that we knew from the very onset that the aircraft in question, an Air India Express Boeing 737-800, had landed in windy and rainy conditions in Kozhikode more than halfway down the runway and appeared to be unable to stop. Now the crash report, which is officially out, confirms that. And I'll just read out the operative part of that crash report. It says the probable cause of accident was the non-adherence to standard operating procedures by the pilot flying, in other words, the pilot in command, in this particular case, the pilot in the left-hand seat, wherein he continued an unstabilized approach and landed beyond the touchdown zone halfway down the runway in spite of a go-around call by the pilot monitoring. In other words, he'd been warned by the co-pilot. This warranted a mandatory go-around. In other words, he should have aborted the takeoff and should have just continued down the runway, taken off again and made another attempt to land. And the failure of the pilot monitoring, in other words, the pilot who was actually saying go-around, to take over controls and execute a go-around. So in this, they've blamed both the pilot in command and the pilot monitoring. The pilot flying was the commander of the aircraft. And in very simple terms, this says that the touchdown point in the runway was more than halfway down the length of the runway. There was an alert sounded by the co-pilot telling the pilot in command to go around, but the pilot in command did not, in fact, adhere to that. In that situation, according to this document, the standard operating procedure would have been for the co-pilot, on the basis of his warning to go around, to take over controls, and then perhaps proceed to do that. In either case, irrespective of who actually should have gone around and what does go around mean, it means applying full power, gently lifting up and just attempting to land once again, irrespective of whether the pilot in command or the co-pilot should be doing that. The fact of the matter is they didn't, and therefore the aircraft was unable to stop by the end of the runway. This is a tabletop runway. It slammed down the bottom of a very steep slope, and 21 people, I believe, lost their lives, 19 individuals, passengers on board, and 2 crew members. So there was a detailed investigation, and this is what has been found. Now, just a couple of other points, which, I mean, I've been able to go through. It's more than 200 pages long. 3 seconds before touchdown, and I'm quoting from the report, the pilot monitoring, in other words, the co-pilot, again tried to catch the attention of the pilot flying by giving a feeble, uncomfortable call, "Captain," when the aircraft had crossed the end of the touchdown zone, in other words, 3,600 feet beyond the threshold. Now, in a runway, there is an ideal touchdown zone. It extends for a particular length of that runway, and usually pilots would always attempt to land within that touchdown zone. If you go beyond that touchdown zone, and it happens frequently, for example, if there is a tailwind, in this particular case, there was a tailwind component. The aircraft was being pushed down. It was a windy day. The surface of the runway was wet. That was another factor which would have adversely affected the landing, the braking performance of the aircraft. So the co-pilot did give an alert 3 seconds before touchdown. The co-pilot again tried to catch the attention of the PF, in other words, the pilot flying, by giving a feeble, uncomfortable call, "Captain," when the aircraft had crossed the end of the touchdown zone, 3,600 feet beyond the threshold. It had crossed 3,600 feet of that runway and had still not touched down. Sarah, is the key point. The aircraft earlier on, as it was making its approach, because, you know, things started going wrong a little bit prior to that as well. The aircraft deviated 1.7 dots below the glide slope. When aircraft comes down at a particular angle along what is called a glide slope, If you are too steep in that glide slope, there are alerts which are sounded out automatically, and this is what happened on this occasion as well. There were 2 EGPWS alerts. In other words, there was a caution for glide slope, glide slope, glide slope. That's what the aircraft automatically calls up. Now the pilot flying increased the pitch attitude. In other words, he tried to come out of that, and the descent rate did start to decrease, but then they got over the runway and tried to stop the aircraft, get it to land, but it floated. It didn't land immediately, it floated, and the touchdown point of the aircraft more than halfway down the length of the runway. Again, I'm going to just read out 1 or 2 small bits here. As soon as the aircraft did touch down, and as I mentioned, and I say this repeatedly, well beyond the halfway point of the runway, the pilot flying immediately resorted to maximum manual braking, overriding the automatic brake selection. The pilot monitoring the co-pilot gave the standard calls for speed brake up and auto brake disarm, but there was no response from the pilot flying to the standard calls given by the pilot monitoring as per the standard operating procedure. By then the pilots would have known they're very close to the edge of the runway. So it is a very sad circumstance, the situation which resulted in this crash. As I mentioned, more than 20 people, I believe 21, did lose their lives, and now it's taken a year for this crash report to come out. Sarah.